Hello and welcome to another Every Tuesday tutorial. In this week's tutorial we're going to be creating some rainbow brush lettering. By request, I've gotten quite a few requests lately asking for some more lettering videos, so I thought this one would be a really fun one to experiment with. And if you want a full course on watercolor water brush lettering, I'll leave a link to my Skillshare class, and if you've never tried Skillshare before, you can actually take it for free. And I've got two other videos on lettering on YouTube, so definitely check those out because this kind of picks up where those leave off. Those are really good foundational videos. And for this one, we're going to take it one step further. So if you've already got using a brush down with extra weight on your downstrokes and lighter weight on your upstrokes, then you'll be in great shape for this. So I want to walk you through all the different materials I'll be using. I'll leave links to all those in the video description as well, so check that out. And okay, so I'll just get right into it. Right now I've got just a regular cup of water right here. I've got a paper towel for using as I go. I've got a Winsor & Newton #1 round brush. You don't need a Winsor & Newton brush by any means, but if you have a small round brush, that'll be ideal for this kind of thing. And I'm using Pentel tube watercolors. These are really, really affordable. And if you've taken my course before, then you already have all the materials you need to be able to do this. And I've also got just your regular paint palette with all my watercolors in here. And I'm using some just strips of watercolor paper that I've cut up. For stuff like this, I really like using a smaller sheet of paper. I feel like it's a little less wasteful and I can make my watercolor paper go that much further, so I cut it down to a bunch of different random sizes so I can experiment and play around, and then I'm not really wasteful. So the watercolor paper that I'm using is this Strathmore 140-pound cold press watercolor paper, also pretty affordable. And the other thing that I'm going to be using is some masking tape. It doesn't really matter what kind of tape you have. This is what I have on hand, so I'm going to be using this as well. Okay, so the whole point to this is getting your water to sit on your paper and then creating this kind of tie-dye rainbow color effect. So I want to walk you through two methods to achieve this. One method makes things a lot easier than the other method does, but the other method allows you to have a greater variety of color, and I'll explain exactly why that is. So I want to walk you through the easier method first, and then we'll go on to the more advanced method, and this is going to be the final outcome, this one right here for this video. Okay, so I'm going to move this right up here so we've got this to reference, and I'm going to grab a small sheet of watercolor paper, and I'm just going to do the letter R so you can see the first method. And I already know that I'm going to be using some blues and greens for this. So I'm using cobalt blue, I'm using emerald green, and then I'm using yellow green up here. So once I have my kind of color scheme established, and I like using colors that are very close to each other on a color wheel. So these are kind of in the same family, so they'll mix really well. Like if you do like a lime green and an orange, you're going to get a really muddy blend, but when you blend any of these together, you're going to get a really pretty blend. So just keep that in mind when you're choosing your colors. So out of these three colors, my yellow green is the lightest color. So that's what I want to use for this method. And what I want to do is just water it down quite a bit. So I'm getting very little color on my brush. I'm getting a lot more water than I am color. The whole point of this is to get a barely visible base so you kind of can see what you're working with, whereas the other method we're just using straight up water. So this will help you play around with this method before you move on to just water. So let me get a little more water on my brush. Okay, so all I'm going to do is draw out the letter R. This is probably even too much color for me. I want way less color than that. Definitely want more water than color. And I dip into my cup of water a lot as I'm doing this. Actually, the more water the better for this kind of technique. Okay, and you can see the water. I don't know if you can see actually. Let me hold it up. So there's a lot of water sitting right on the surface of the paper. So this is what I'm going to work with for blending my colors. So because I'm already using this color in my color scheme, that's why I can use it as a base, because it won't look weird mixed with the colors that I'm using. And because it's so light, the other colors will have a chance to really stand out. Okay, so I'm going to go in with my cobalt first, my darkest color, and I'm getting quite a bit of color on my brush this time. And all I'm going to do is just touch the surface of the water and it'll start blending itself. So I'm just going to choose some random areas. There's no like real rhyme or reason. And if it's not kind of moving the way you want it to, dab it. Don't spread it, because you'll get better blends with the other colors if you do it this way. So I'm just randomly choosing different areas. I want it to be varied enough so it looks like that rainbow tie-dye. So it's super random. Okay, so now I'm going to move, and it kind of looks like a snake. I'm going to move on to my emerald green next. So I'm going to grab a bunch of color on the tip of my brush, and then once again just kind of randomly placing this emerald green. And it's okay if you kind of overlap it with the cobalt in some places, but you want you don't want to do that everywhere. Okay, so now I still have a couple of holes peeking out, so now I'm going to grab a bunch of the yellow green on my brush this time instead of before when we had very little. I want a lot, and I'm just going to dab it again. Okay, so I'm just going to leave it like this to dry and come back to it later. So you don't want to tip it and you don't want to move it too much, because typically I would just leave it. I would just stand away and leave it, but since we're moving on to another one, I have to move it, so I'm going to move it very carefully, because anytime it kind of moves or bends, your colors are mixing more, and that's when you kind of get the muddier blends instead of the really pretty color separated blends, which is what we really want. So I'm going to move it as slow as I can go here and try not to blend it too much. Okay, so this next one, I'm going to grab a larger sheet, and this time, because it's a longer word, as I'm piling on the water on top of this paper, the paper will start to bow, and I need it to be as flat as possible so there's no movement of the paper where the color starts blending like I was just talking about. So I've got my masking tape right here, and I'm just going to cut off a few pieces and kind of place them sporadically around. Hopefully that'll keep it down. All right, so we're gonna get right into it, and this time I'm just going to write out the word rainbow in one fell swoop, and I'm only using water this time. So the first method is really good as a practice, so you can kind of get an idea of how the water works, and you can see it really well as you're working. You really need to be in a place where you're getting just enough light where you can see the water on the paper. I tried it early in the morning. It's about 6 in the evening right now, and I've got kind of the perfect amount of light going where I can see the water on top of the paper really well. I tried it in the bright early morning, and it was too bright and I couldn't see the water as well. So just make sure you're in a good position of your house or the time of day, so you can see the water, and you'll have a better result that way, because your letters will be formed better when you can actually see them. Makes sense, right? Okay, so I'm going to go through, and I'm just going to put a very thick layer of water on spelling out rainbow, and I'll speed up the video so it doesn't take forever, but you'll notice that I'm going to be dipping into the water a lot during this. My water's right here. Okay, here we go. Okay, so I don't want to move the paper too much, just so the water doesn't move, but hopefully you can kind of see what's going on here. Let me tip it just slightly. So yeah, there's a pretty thick layer of water on the paper right now. So now I'm going to do the exact same thing we did before, but because I only have water this time, I'm not restricted to involving the light green everywhere in the word. So that's the huge advantage to just using water, is I can choose whatever colors I want and put them wherever I want here, and I don't have to include one color all the way through. Okay, so I'm going to start like I did before. I'm going to keep this end darker. I'm going to follow the the example almost exactly. So I've got the darker blues, purples, and then it moves into greens, and then we'll involve maybe a little bit lighter right here with yellows, and then we'll go all the way back to purple by the end. Okay, so I'm going to start with my cobalt blue again. I just like starting with darker colors because it gives me an idea of where to fit in some prettier, lighter colors. And once again, no rhyme or reason. I'm just kind of seeing how it looks as I go, wanting some good variety. But this is definitely going to be my darkest color, so I'm going to want more of the dark blue in this letter more than any of the other letters that follow it. So I'm going to keep it a little more sparse as I move through. Okay, so next I'm going to put in some purple. And then some of this emerald green. I'm actually going to grab some of this lighter blue too. Moving into the lighter greens. All right, I want to involve the emerald green a little bit more in this end. And maybe the light blue. Okay, moving into yellows. And oranges. Some red. Some red purple. And then we'll finish it off with the dark purple. Okay, so this is a super fun technique. You don't have to obviously do the whole rainbow in your word, but I mean, we could have done a word just with using the light green, the emerald green, and the cobalt blue, and that would have been really beautiful too. So it's all about figuring out what kind of colors you want to use for whatever specific word you're using. So really fun technique for brush style lettering with watercolors. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please subscribe. I release a new design tutorial or lettering tutorial every Tuesday. And for more design tutorials and a bunch of freebies, head on over to my blog, every-tuesday.com. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next week.